Hi, everybody. Welcome to the How to Be Great podcast. Thank you for joining us once again. My name is Rob McNichol. With me over there, look, is Mr. Paul Benson. Good to have you with me, Paul.
Hey, mate. How you doing? Hello, everyone. Hope you had a good week. How about you, Rob? What have you been up to?
Yeah,
Been golfing this week?
I have been golfing. Yeah, a bit of golf yesterday. It was most erratic stuff. We're not here to talk about my golfing prowess. If you want to know how to be great at golf, watch the European Tour, the US Tour. Do not watch me. I could not tell you that. But I do want to talk about things that are great in wrestling. And one of those things that we were talking about last week was the King of the Ring. We'll be talking about that in just a second to find out what the results were of last week's poll. And today it's a brand new topic that we've not got anywhere near before. It's one I've been looking forward to doing since the start of this project. It's a slightly confusing topic to explain, so hopefully some of you that have already joined in on social media and not necessarily got what we were saying will understand as we talk, but I definitely think the show is going to be one of the better ones because it's such a rich vein to really talk about. So once we get into it, I'm sure you are going to love it. For those of you that are watching, hello, thank you for joining us here on YouTube Live. For those of you that are listening, via the podcast, hello to you too, wherever you're listening from or watching from. We really appreciate you being with us. And the reason I'm addressing both is because occasionally I might refer to something that's actually happening on screen, and I don't want our podcast listeners to feel left out. But if you really want all the visual stuff or the wacky, wild visual stuff, please join us for our weekly quiz. That's what I'm doing. I'm getting a little plug in for the quiz.
There we go.
8 p.m. Sunday evening is now my favourite hour and a half or 2 hours of the week, where we have it's only 20 questions, which we stretch over a long period of time, but it's the most fun, even if Paul and I are starting to get a little bit, we're getting a bit upstage now, aren't we?
Oh, mate, Chris Hatch is the biggest mistake we ever made in our wish to conquer the wrestling airwaves. Yeah, like he's come in, run roughshod over us, and now he's the only thing that people want to see.
Yeah, so we're having to limit our Hatchomania segments every week on the quiz. But if you don't know what we're talking about, that's fine. But come and join in on a Sunday night, Facebook Live and YouTube live broadcast where you can join in with our quiz. And it's a great giggle. Anyway, what we're here to talk about today is how to be great. If it's the first time you watching or listening to this, what we essentially do is we take a topic within wrestling, take it right down to its nuance. Paul and I come up with a top 5 about whatever that particular topic is, and then it's over to you to do the vote. For example, last week we were deciding who is the greatest king of the ring, and we put down a few little rules for it. It wasn't just how they performed on the night. It wasn't just the interest of that show, but also how they took being the king going forward. Lots of little things like that. That's what influenced us to pick our top 5. I will say that my instinct is, Paul always, every week asks me, what do I think is going to win? And this week, my instinct suggests that people will just go King of the Ring equals Steve Austin. We allowed him on the 5, and he only just got into our 5, it should be said. But my vote would go a different way, as I know Paul's would, because we said it at the end of last week's show. But I think Austin's probably going to win this, Paul, but I'll be interested for you to tell me what the rundown is.
Well, it was a very interesting rundown, actually. So first of all, in fifth position, he's not going to come fifth very often on these things, but it was Bret Hart.
Okay.
Bottom of our 5. 4th position, Stone Cold Steve Austin. So it turns out 4th. So it turns out more people actually agree with our rationale on that than you might have. Well, we might have thought. So that was a nice surprise in terms of agreeing with us. And speaking of agreeing with us, the winner by an overwhelming majority, Owen Hart, the King of Hearts.
Excellent. Well, that was our pick, wasn't it? And
he was our pick. And I think that might be the first time that's happened, that you, I, and the audience have all had the same pick as a unanimous winner. And it's deservedly so. He did more with that crown than anyone.
I think he was the man. We went into depth last week about Owen, was how he was probably Mr. 1994.
Yeah,
as well as being King of the Ring. Really the iconic figure in WWF anyway of that year. And yeah, I'm really pleased because, like we said last week, I still think Bret's title, Bret's King of the Ring win is the best showing. It's the best King of the Ring tournament. But Bret didn't do anything with the kingship, if that's not even a word, is it? But with the coronation, where obviously it led into a feud with Lawler. But
that was
being King of the Ring directly didn't do anything for Brett. And actually, as we ran down last week, it didn't really do anything for Austin. It was just a platform for the 316 promo. And indeed, the matches with Mero and Roberts are nothing particularly to write home about. So I think Owen had the best combo of an entertaining tournament, plus really, really running with the King gimmick. So yes, I'm absolutely delighted with that. Well done, audience, and well done us.
Indeed.
For coming to an agreement. That suggests, I don't know if that suggests that people actually listen to us, or whether listen to our views and go, Paul and Rob are right.
I'm not quite sure about that.
Or whether we were just in tune with everybody this week, more so than I anticipated.
I think it's the exception that proves the rule, my friend.
Well, we will see, and there's plenty of those as far as this podcast is concerned. Right, okay, on to today's edition. Today's topic on how to be great that we put to you on social media over the last couple of days. There was a few responses, but like I said, there was a little bit of minor confusion about the topic. So let me try and elucidate a bit more. What we are saying is it's the best wrestler/non-wrestler combo. I think what we had the issue with is we used the phrase "in real life," didn't we? Was it in real life or something like on screen, off screen, or something like that?
I think in ring, out ring. I think I used
in ring and out of the ring is what we used on the socials, and I think people took that as being best friends. So we had people saying like Michaels and Triple H and that sort of thing. That's not what we're after. We're after pure kayfabe, okay? Pure what you see on the screen, but it's the combination of a manager / valet / advocate or agent or whatever they call themselves with an in-ring talent or team or faction. And so you will see as we go along the kind of things that we are talking about. But before we get into it, Paul, how easy did you find coming up with a list this week? I think I've got a lot of people to talk about, but realistically a short list of probably I've got 7 or 8 from which I would take our 5 if indeed you're in sync with me again.
Similarly, there's endless very good ones. There's endless ones that you'd want to talk about that we're not going to have time to talk about, but actually finding a definitive number one is probably the hardest this week. That I look at the list and I go, there isn't one there that screams at me. There's a lot of excellent ones that would be worthy of it, but there's not one that stands head and shoulders above the others. So it'd be interesting to see where we get to with this. I think we're going to need to, because of the sheer breadth of numbers, I think we are going to have to be more quick fire than usual.
We probably will.
So apologies in advance if we skim over anyone's favourites.
Well, that's interesting, actually. And I think that might be where we start our topic this week in terms of, because what I think, I'm not going to pat ourselves too much on the back, but I think what a lot of places would do here is do who's the greatest manager, right? I think that's kind of almost the topic, who's the greatest manager. But I don't think, I think I know who would win that. Most of the time, if we say, like, if we said what was the best King of the Ring tournament, Bret Hart would have won, right? There's certain ones that we've done, which is the best, blah blah blah. We know what would win, so we tweak the question a little bit. I think if we said who's the greatest manager of all time, Bobby Heenan would win. Would you agree?
Yep. Yeah. Without much deliberation.
Yeah, I think Bobby Heenan would win. There's a fantastic episode of Legends of Wrestling Roundtable, which was a bunch of shows that they had in about 10, 12 years ago on the what was WWE 24/7, I think, at the time. And it's now on the network. And they've got one called The Lost Art of the Wrestling Manager, which is really interesting. And whoever's on the panel, I forget exactly who's on there, but I think Michael Hayes, Jim Ross, a couple of others. And they all come down on Bobby Heenan as being number one. I think they do a bit of a Mount Rushmore sort of thing, and they all come down. They all have Heenan on there. So he would undoubtedly win that subject, I think. But I'll be honest, and I'll go in with this right from the start. I don't have a Bobby Heenan and wrestler combo that I'm pushing for here. I've got a couple that I think he was good with, the ones he was better with, but I don't have one to me that stands up on this top shelf.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've got one on my list. I've got a list of about 15, 16, and one of them's Bobby Heenan. But it's certainly in the lower half of that list if you're ranking them, without question, which is unusual. You think he doesn't have that one iconic client, really, does he? He was so good with so many guys that it was almost, especially when he was feuding with Hulk Hogan, it was almost that Bobby Heenan was the star. Unlike most of these combos that were well remembered and successful, the guys in the ring were the ones playing second fiddle to Bobby Heenan.
Mm.
Rightly so, by the way, because he was so good. He's one of the best talents. You could make an argument saying he's the greatest of all time at what he does in wrestling history. And I think he was always the star. So yeah, you're right. I couldn't argue very heavily for any of his combinations.
There's actually a pattern of, I'm not saying he was the first to do it, because obviously wrestling history goes back a very, very long way into all the territories and stuff. But I think the first one that comes to people's mind, like you just said, Heenan versus Hogan, which obviously has its pinnacle with Andre at WrestleMania 3. That pattern for years of Heenan providing a new heel for Hogan was replicated really with Undertaker and Ted DiBiase later in the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where DiBiase, had a little bit behind Yokozuna. Wasn't the manager of, but he was involved in that feud. And then you had IRS and King Kong Bundy and the other Undertaker and all that kind of stuff. Not in that order. And again, in the early days of Hogan's run in WCW, Jimmy Hart is with the Dungeon of Doom, and it's the Dungeon of Doom that are rolling out opponents for Hogan. So it's a tried and tested formula, having the manager. In fact, that'd be another interesting topic for another day, maybe managers versus individuals. But
Harvey Whippleman against the Undertaker stands out to me as well.
Well,
maybe not as long a list, but he had Carl Mahler, he had the Giant Gonzalez, and that might have been it, to be fair. But it was the same sort of vein.
Remember, he said he was going to drop a bomb. That's the bomb. I did a Mick Foley impression rather than a Bobby Heenan one. But I've got Heenan Andre written down. I've got brackets the family when there was the Heenan family. Heenan Perfect was a really great combo, but it's probably a bit short. It's probably a bit short-lived. It wasn't really a combination for all that long. And the other one going back even further that was much more longer-lived. But obviously people won't have seen it so much because it's a little bit further back, is Heenan Bockwinkel. And people that have listened to this podcast for a long time know that I'm a big Nick Bockwinkel fan, from not being around during his era, but going back and watching him. I absolutely adore Nick Bockwinkel, and the Bockwinkel-Heenan combo was beautiful. And it was the kind of combo where, a little bit like Heyman and CM Punk, which we might touch on later, where you think that someone like CM Punk doesn't need a mouthpiece, but Heyman can still add to him. Nick Bockwinkel's one of the greatest talkers of all time. He didn't need anyone with him, but Heenan still added something to that presentation. And I think there's going to be a difference here between some of these topics. Is sometimes it's a manager that talks for the person, and sometimes it's a person that's in the background a bit, but they just add to the presentation. And it's not a case of being the manager that speaks for them. It's just the overall package. And I think we're going to end up with a few of those kind of unique ones on our list when it comes to it. So that's Bobby Heenan done. In terms of, I think we both agreed that probably none of those examples are going to be pushed onto the top 5.
The only thing I did want to say about Heenan and Perfect really quickly was I think it's the only instance I can think of. So when Bobby Heenan managed Mr. Perfect as a wrestler, obviously then he had that spell under the coach, didn't he? When he lost to Bret Hart at SummerSlam. But then is it the only time that a manager has had a manager? Because really, Bobby Heenan was Mr. Perfect's manager when he was the executive assistant of Ric Flair. And you could argue
consultant. Was it executive consultant?
Executive consultant, that was the one. And it kind of, Bobby Heenan kind of acted as his mentor / manager, which I thought was fascinating. Not worthy of much further discussion, but I did want to sort of flag it.
Well, I think the idea was meant to be that Heenan was really Flair's manager, but he wasn't allowed to be Flair's manager because he was a broadcast journalist. So Perfect was Heenan's representative, wasn't it? I think that was kind of the idea. True. And again, it was great. It was really great. And certainly things that don't make our top 5 does not mean that we don't think anything of them. I think in fact, does Flair not do a promo after losing to Savage at WrestleMania 8 where he basically explains the thing? He explains, I'm there and Perfect's there. The whole thing's watched over by Heenan. I think he actually explains the dynamic.
That.
I'm sure that's post his loss. I can see him being all bloodied, so I think it's post his loss to Savage at WrestleMania 8. Speaking of Savage, I've just said Savage. Should we go there straight away?
We might as well.
I think one of the first things that came into my mind, and certainly I think it was the one that was mentioned by the most people on social media, was Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Now, it's the duo, the fascinating aspect of the duo in real life. how their relationship and their on-screen relationship didn't necessarily mirror. I believe they were still together on screen when they'd fallen out in real life.
That's right. Yeah.
Liz went away for a bit, came back. It carries on into WCW where they split up again. It's a very, very interesting dynamic, but it lasted so long. The story is, I think it's over 10 years, isn't it, on TV, really, if you go right from the very start of them appearing together through to the WCW days. So to me, you don't think of one without the other. And it's even interesting that Savage had other, interests, obviously, with Sensational Queen Sherry. But to me, Savage Liz it's a lock, isn't it?
Oh, unquestionably. It did everything. They were a package when they were together, and he was, coming up towards his first WWF title run. Like, having Elizabeth there was not only sort of a way to legitimize him as a face and make him relatable to the audience, but it facilitated so much of what he did as a character. Having her be the object that got the mega powers together and then split them up again and drove a wedge and made him turn heel, which ultimately split Liz and Savage apart. Then he was you always felt that while he was going through that heel run, everything he did was kind of to not feud with Miss Elizabeth as such, but to maybe prove that he could do it without her. Almost like, saying, I could do this on my own. I don't need you, almost unspoken. But you always felt like she was, even when she was off screen, she was the driver behind all his antics, just so he could, the more heelish he was, the more he wound her up. Totally unspoken, but that was always there, underlined to me. And then obviously when they got back together at WrestleMania 7, one of the greatest WrestleMania moments of all time. The following WrestleMania, the feud with Flair was built around it. She was, without doing much of anything physically or getting involved in match and stuff, she was so important to everything he did and the whole pattern of his career. She's there's nothing more to be said in terms of placing on the list. It's got to be there. It's got to be in the 5.
I really do think it has, because it's not, as you said, I think you underlined everything that is important here, is that she was involved in so much. She wasn't just someone that stood in the background.
Nope.
She wasn't just a pretty face. She was a very pretty face, but she actually offered so much more. But I think sometimes it was what you inferred as a viewer. You just by looking at her and the way she dressed, even just the way her hair was, that she had this very wholesome, nice girlfriend, image, didn't she? And so when Savage goes off with Sherry, who was everything that Liz wasn't in terms of being brash and over the top and aggressive, and so I think I will say quite a lot. I don't think Randy and Liz would have worked. I mean, it did work even before they split up, but I don't think Randy, Liz, the whole dynamic getting back together would have worked without Sherry. I think it's really important to factor in Sherry, because again, on my list, I don't have anything that's. Sherry's almost comes into my Bobby Heenan category of everyone that Sherry worked with. She enhanced and was brilliant at what she did, but I don't have a duo which holds her right up here on my list. But certainly for what she did with Randy, and how that brought Liz back into the fold, as you say, at WrestleMania 7, it was important, I think, for the character of Miss Elizabeth that she needed that counterpart of Sensational Sherry.
Yeah, and absolutely. And on that note, I would have Sherry or right at the top of my list with Randy Savage.
Okay.
It was a completely different dynamic to Miss Elizabeth, obviously, but it was such a great pairing of vicious heels, and you could feel and she was so different. She was manipulative. She was driving. Randy Savage's character is a man who is rash, doesn't think things through logically. He's led by his heart, not by his head, and that's both as a heel and a face. Whereas Elizabeth guided that and helped him keep on the right path. Sherry manipulated that. Sherry used that hot-headedness and that brashness to her own ends, stoked it and fueled it, and essentially used that to have the Macho Man do her bidding. She knew what she was doing, and as soon as he'd failed and as soon as his career was over, boom, kicked him straight to the curb after that. Literally kicked him after that Warrior match. So to me, I would make a case for getting those two in the 5 as well.
Okay,
I probably won't make it, but I think I rate it that highly.
Well, we'll see. We'll plant that to one side and we'll come back to it. What I will say, just to kind of wrap up the Macho Man stuff, is that something I liked about him that I think sometimes elsewhere in wrestling it can be a bit of an issue is that, listen, I understand why wrestlers have to turn quote unquote babyface heel, but sometimes it's at the expense of realism. I mean, there will be people in your life that you go, he used to be quite a nice bloke. He's actually a bit of a tosser now. But it'll be a gradual development over a long period of time about whether they've got money or they've got, a chip on their shoulder about something or whatever it might be. It very rarely happens like that overnight. And I think there are things in wrestling where someone suddenly, this nice person who's been lovely for, a dozen years, suddenly is a nasty person and stitches up their mate. And you sort of go, really, would that happen? Especially when they go backwards and forwards. If you look at Savage's career, he's not massively different, is he? Like the heel Randy Savage and the babyface Randy Savage are not massively different. And you could argue that the whole reason he was a heel for that time when the Mega Power split up was because of losing Liz and being manipulated by Sherry. And I think the line in between is close enough that you totally and utterly believe Savage one way or another. He doesn't really change. It's just how much he puts up with his environment. Just see what I'm saying?
100%. I think he's one of the most believable characters in wrestling history and so pliable because of that.
I agree.
Everything he did was logical. I've long advocated that, if you're being silly about it, he was the babyface. He was in the right in that breakup with Hulk Hogan, and the best heels are the ones that have that germ of truth and that germ of correctness in what they're doing. And Savage always did. Whenever Savage turned heel or turned face, there was a very bona fide reason. And because that character was so hot-headed and so manipulated and so driven by, what's in front of him, he was like a dog, wasn't he? He was like a dog who, he couldn't think about the bigger picture. He could only think about his immediate need. And because of that, you could, if you wrote him well, which they always did, WWE always wrote Randy Savage perfectly from start to finish, and WCW did a good job too. It worked either way, and it was logical. And I don't think it's hard to understand that Randy Savage is my favorite wrestler of all time. I just think he was absolutely wonderful. And yeah, I think he works both ways, and that's why I have both manager sets on. Face and heel.
I'll do an example of someone I don't think it works with modern day, and then we'll move on. And it's someone I've got a huge amount of respect for. I think they're a terrific babyface, and I think they're a terrific heel. But I don't like the disparity between babyface Seth Rollins and heel Seth Rollins. I think they're so different, and I think he does a great job of both. But he's been whatever the Shield was, and then the face of the company, heel under Triple H. Then I'm sorry for everything I did. Babyface Seth Rollins, and then he was pure and he was good and he was, with the fans and apologised and you believed him, and now he's back being a heel again. And I think he's good at he's been good all the way along. But you go, it's such a wavy arc, and he's going. If he turns again, you're like, well, really anymore? Anyway, we're not here to talk about modern day Seth Rollins. We're here to talk about other people. I have a list of managers. I want to rattle through these and get rid of them early, because what we sometimes do is end up having them as a bit of a footnote as we try and get the podcast wrapped. But I want to go through them quite early. I've got a list here of what I consider to be 8 or 9 really good, or at least very prominent wrestling managers at various different times in history. But I can't really put someone with them that get up to the top level. And they're very, very disparate. But I'm going to mention to you AJ Lee, Sonny, Stacy Keibler, Jim Mitchell, Skandar Akbar, Playboy Gary Hart, Freddie Blassie, Slick. There's a hell of a bunch of names, all sorts of different people in there from different eras. I was never a big Slick fan, but I'm saying that he was very prominent in his time. All of those people, big names in wrestling history, exception Playboy Gary Hart. If you go back and watch some of his stuff, what a great talker and believable heel manager and whatever. Skandar Akbar and his groups. I always thought the Sinister Minister was fun to watch in ECW and TNA. But I don't have anyone that goes with any of those to be anywhere near our list. But I want to mention them all. And in fact, there was a summer where AJ Lee was the biggest star in wrestling. But she was with Kane and with CM Punk and with Daniel Bryan and with Dolph Ziggler and so many different people. But
she was the star, wasn't she? She was the star.
Yeah, and in fact that brings us the topic forward a little bit. Is that if the manager is the star, that kind of makes it a problem. Sonny was always the star, wasn't she?
She was. I don't think problem's the wrong word for me, because a star's a star. And if it draws
True.
money and gets fans' attention, it doesn't matter what role that star is in necessarily. If it's a bloody cameraman getting over, as long as that's drawing money.
But it should be the act, and that's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Macho Man Liz wasn't the star, but she was part of the act that there was.
For our conversation, it needs to be a pair. But in general wrestling terms, it doesn't matter who's the star. Which is why Sunny, I think, was great in her role. But you're bang right, she's not even remotely in the conversation for what we're talking about, because there was never anyone who was a pairing with her. Whereas, like you say, Savage and Liz were a pair together. So I've got like I said, go back to what I was saying earlier about Heenan being the star, and it probably is detrimental to the conversation. Again, the conversation we're having now. There needs to be more equality, or at least there needs to be, the guy in the ring needs to be better because of the actions of the person outside the ring. And there was never the case with Sunny. She was just what she was throughout the whole way, and everything else was an accessory.
Very much so. And there's lots of women on this list, and we could go into a discussion about what's the difference between a manager or a valet or whatever. But I don't think we really need to. It's simply that they were the second, to use an old British wrestling term, and they would enhance the act. I mentioned Stacey in there. I always thought, and I actually, in doing a bit of research for this, I found some other lists that people had done of best 10 and worst 10 of these sorts of things. And I saw on one of them, it said on the worst list was the Dudleys and Stacey Keibler. And I'm like, I thought the Dudleys and Stacey Keibler were a surprisingly good combo. I mean,
they're all right.
I don't think they're anywhere near the top of this list, but I thought Stacey worked quite well with the Dudleys. I thought it was quite a fun little addition in there.
Absolutely fine. Yeah. Another one, that probably won't make our list that I'd like to mention, I don't know if you've got it on there, is Luna and Bam Bam.
I haven't got it on there, actually, but it's a good shout.
Luna Vachon and Bam Bam Bigelow, they're not going to pull up any trees. They're not going to make our top 5, but they were such a fun pairing. A pair of, how should we call them? Counterculture baddies.
Very good.
Counterculture baddies. I just thought they were great fun together, and a really well-matched pairing. You can imagine them being together in real life.
Yeah, you definitely could. Definitely could. And I think that's hugely important for those pairings when they don't explicitly say they are boyfriend and girlfriend, but that's essentially what they're going for.
Yeah,
what was she called? His main squeeze, which was
his main squeeze, exactly.
I think one of the reasons I didn't necessarily think of Luna and Bam Bam, and I think that some people to get to the top of this list, I think longevity has to be a thing. Like I said, there's several combos that we could mention here, and you go, wow, what a great combination, but they only existed for a few months, and therefore it's difficult to say they deserve a place in wrestling history. And I would say that they weren't together anywhere near long enough for you to push that, nor did they have a prominent enough positions on television. But it's a great mention that I've not gone for. A couple of other ones similar on those sort of lines, again, that I wouldn't necessarily have right to the very top. I've got both Lita and the Hardys and Lita and Edge, two different things that she was, big on.
Interesting. I've got a list with some stars next to it for ones that I would have in the upper echelons. Lita and Edge, unquestionably, in that upper echelon. Do you mind if we just talk about that for a bit?
Of course, no.
Is that a good time?
Point. Yeah, that's the whole point.
What a wonderful pairing those guys were. Edge and Lita made each other. More so made Edge, which was obviously the idea. Edge was a decent upper level babyface that you could clear. Clear that management really wanted to get up to that next level, but you could never just quite get there. He was always sort of hacking just below. Turned heel in a really good fashion, and then obviously the whole Matt Hardy Lita thing blew up, and oh my God, did they harness that the right way? Do you remember in the summer, when was it? Summer 2005 when it all kicked off? And
it would have been, because One Night Stand, there was the whole...
That's right. Yeah.
One Night Stand, Paul Heyman says Matt freaking Hardy, doesn't he? So that's
it.
Just before Matt comes back.
So, everyone lost their mind, me included, about how they brought Matt Hardy back and just basically quashed him and fed him to Edge. Oh my God, they've left so much money. Matt Hardy could have been a massive star. Rah, 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 rah. They do know what they're doing sometimes, don't they? They do know what they're doing. And they use Matt Hardy to make Edge the biggest bastard in wrestling. And the beauty thing about Edge and Lita as a combination is, I don't know about you, and I don't know about anybody else out there, but I despise them because they were genuinely, because they were two good-looking, successful people who, how do I put this politely, enjoyed each other's company, and everything about them was brash and horrible, and made you want to genuinely dislike them. I thought they generated heat together like nobody's business, and better than any couple have since, in terms of a man and a woman in wrestling. I just thought they were wonderful pairing together, and if it were just me putting this top 5 together, they'd be right on there with a bullet.
Well, I mean, you've made a very convincing point, actually, and certainly there's a couple of people that I've got on my list that you might have just talked yourself above. So certainly pencil them down for the time being. We'll come back to them. I thought it was an interesting line that you used where you said Edge and Lita absolutely made each other, and I thought that sentence works if you change the word "made." But it was a case of the sort of a reality. Something that happened in reality, them seizing upon it. Sometimes something will happen in reality and they bring it onto screen and you go, that doesn't really work. Sometimes, reality
is Seth Rollins.
Well, I mean, there is that. That's a good shout. Another one from a WCW era would be, I never thought the whole thing with Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit and Nancy worked. A woman as she was at the time. I just never thought it never. I've always thought that Kevin Sullivan's probably I've never understood Kevin Sullivan at all. And that's just me, but I never thought that thing worked, and it was all supposed to be that sort of like little wink to the camera. What's going on in real life, and it was like, it's 1996. No one did know what was happening in real life. But anywho, Edge and Lita absolutely have to be in that conversation. Then a few others of that sort of ilk, though. The slightly real life, or at least the male-female partnership. Lana and Rusev, from a modern perspective, worked very well, especially to start with.
Yeah, really well.
I think faded. Lana was the star. Then everyone realized Rusev actually had a personality. Then they tinkered with her character so much that she was American, then she wasn't, and then together, then she wasn't, and then the whole Lashley thing has been awful. But a fun act, though. I think a positive act between the two of them, and worthy of a mention. Again, going way back. For anyone that's, again, I wasn't around. I can't pretend to be around at the time, but the stuff I've seen looking back. The Jimmy Garvin act with Sunshine and Precious is tremendous stuff. Obviously, was a lot of fun. What's that? Sorry,
I'm not familiar. Shamefully, I don't really know anything about that.
Right. Essentially, he had a valet, very much a valet, and then he got an assistant for it. Not massively dissimilar to the Deborah Miss Kitty thing.
Oh yeah.
Of like having one valet, then having another one that was her valet, as it were, and then they split up and he went with a new one, and one of them was his real life wife. It's very fun angle in world class. They would be definitely worth a shout. And indeed another one which is interesting in terms of the number 2 being more over than the number 1. I think you have to mention Mark Mero and Sable.
You do. You have to mention him because it made a star in Sable, but it probably killed a star potentially in Mark Mero. I thought about these guys just purely because of how big Sable was, but really they didn't do a lot. For husband and wife, they had zero natural chemistry. There was nothing there. And Mark Mero was, I like the Wild Man in isolation. I thought it was a fun little character. But there was no real benefit from Sable being there. I
think Marvelous Mark is a much better character.
No question.
Than the Wild Man. I liked Marvelous Mark.
I did. They were much better foils than a pairing on screen anyway, and in real life, as it turns out, I think.
Well, it did seem that way. It's very, very interesting. They've never done really anything with her and Brock, like nothing.
Well, it's not on the cards, mate. It's been Paul Heyman said that in the past. It is not up for discussion. Sable, Rena Lesnar, whatever you want to call her, is Brock Lesnar's wife. She is private. She is no longer a celebrity. She's in private, and that's that. There is no question. And the mother of his children.
And you would have said that 6 months ago about Michelle McCool and Undertaker. No, you would.
Very true.
They were never ever going to acknowledge that, and then they did, and we've seen what's happened there.
True.
Okay, I've got one more of those sorts of connections, and it's one that I do want to offer as a possible one for the top list. What about Goldust and Marlena?
Do you know what I did? I did that sucking in with it completely involuntarily. I was not. That was not me. Not me trying to do it.
Paul Benson involuntarily sucks. That is what we learn about that.
I like these guys together. I think they were very good. I think it breathed real life into the Goldust character that maybe wasn't there before. I wouldn't have them anywhere near the top 5. I enjoyed them for what they were. No, I enjoyed them for what they were. They were a fun act. They complemented each other. But longevity-wise, not so much. And again, they didn't really get anywhere together.
I don't think that's fair.
I'd put them as an upgraded version of the Bam Bam Bigelow and Luna example.
No, I think that's very harsh. I think they absolutely did get somewhere together. I think to begin with, I mean, you had this, let's call it what it was. You had this pseudo gay angle with Goldust. Was he gay? Was he not? Was he trying to seduce Razor Ramon, or was he just trying to throw him off guard because of his title? Great angle, controversial but good angle. She then turns up, as the old Roddy Piper thing says. When you think you've got the answers, Goldust changes the questions. So you then she added that dimension of a bit the mysticalness or the strangeness of their act. When you had to turn Goldust babyface, he then became protective of this woman that was obviously his partner, his wife, and so you got the sympathetic side of Goldust, which helped you go into babyface Goldust. And then when he chucked her and went all bizarre Goldust, back comes Luna again. Funnily enough, she was really important in that with the breakup thing. And then if you go a little bit further down the line, you had Pious Goldust, and then she was knocking off Val Venus, wasn't she? And that I think actually went for at least 2.5, 3 years. There was something to do with the two of them.
Maybe you're right. Actually, maybe you're right. It's a fair point. But again, I don't know about you, but I'm purely basing this on what these guys do together rather than as foils.
No, I am as well. But you just said that what they did together didn't really affect anything else.
No,
and
fair point.
I'm countering that, and I'm saying that the Goldust act was good. The Goldust from his debut. Remember the debut when no one knew he had a wig and he threw it off and attacked? Was that against Marty Jannetty? There was the and funny enough, I think his second match was against Batman. But
it was indeed.
So you had the early stuff with that Goldust, and then you had what the storyline was going on with Razor. But you needed to keep taking it further. If Goldust was going to be this strange character, you needed more. And then when she appeared, not being a traditional manager, sitting in the chair, the cigar, there was a very, very different side of things. I think she was vital to Goldust, and I love the Goldust character and always have done. But I think she was huge for it.
Yep. Well, you're right. You are absolutely right. I think. I can't argue with that. Like I say, I'm still not revving my engine about having them too close to the top of the list, but you're right. They did a lot more than maybe I'd give them credit for.
Okay, I think I've got one more male-female partnership which I want to push for, or at least offer up, but it's a very non-traditional one. I think we have to talk about Triple H and China.
Yes, we do. That's the one I was hoping you'd say. It's
a very, very different thing because obviously China is more the bodyguard figure. So think, Diesel, or think whoever it might is you think of as. I don't have Christian and Tyson Tomko on my list, but or indeed Ezekiel Jackson and the Brian Kendrick. But if you think about that sort of problem solver, heater as they might call it in the corner, it's weird to have a female doing that. I think there was a time where they were both around the company. I always wanted to see TNA do that with Rockstar Spud and Alpha Female. I think that would have been a brilliant.
I remember you saying that. Yeah,
they could have each worked as the other one's manager in a very different way. But what they did with China alongside Triple H, and what was a very strange thing was that when China started getting more physically involved and having her own matches and having her own moments, she was essentially a babyface, but she was still with Triple H, who was a heel. So she was a heel when she was in his corner, but as soon as she wrestled someone, she was a babyface. China was over. It's really interesting as time goes on to think about, her surgeries and her very strange personal life and the pornography and whatever, and you end up going with China. But that act was red hot. And remember, Triple H's character went through being the pompous blue blood, then the ladies' man. There's another link with Sable, and he had all the women around him. Then there was the whole. I might have these in the wrong order, but then there was the whole Mr. Hughes as the bodyguard thing. and that didn't work for 5 minutes because Mr. Hughes has always been terrible. And then there's China, and that is the moment where Triple H's career starts. Everything before that is absolute from the packet mid card.
Yeah,
and as soon as he's with China, whoosh, she's the catalyst. I think he'd have got there on his own, but she's the catalyst. She is Triple H's Austin 316. That is
without.
He would have got there anyway, but she's the one that kick-started it.
Do you know what? You say that. I'm not massively convinced that's true. They tried a lot with Triple H for a fair old time.
They tried, but it didn't work.
Nothing was moving at all. They put him there with her. They didn't change his character very much initially, but suddenly he had that foil and he had that air of intrigue, and it just allowed him that breathing space, that platform to create a more robust three-dimensional character. But I don't think he would have got that opportunity without China. Like you're dead right when you run down the history. They tried the Bluebird. They tried. I liked Mr. I've always been a bit of a mark for Mr. Hughes. I don't know why. He's objectively terrible, but I don't know why I liked Mr. Hughes. Sue me. So when he came out with
literally like that, be a heel.
When he came out with Triple H at the Royal Rumble, I marked out. I loved it. But he was very quickly replaced by China, and obviously history looks very kindly on that decision. But I think this is a real key partnership. Not only in and of its own right, and it was very entertaining. It lasted in so many incarnations as well. They went through that initial phase. She was by his side for DX, the original DX. She was part of the babyface DX until the big turn. Well, let me get this right. She turned and then he turned and they both turned. Is that right? Yeah, WrestleMania. Yeah. And I just think it was. Oh mate, it's huge. One of the very best, and a non-traditional one because, like you say, she wasn't a manager. She wasn't a valet. She was kind of a bodyguard, but in a lot of ways they were equals, just with different roles. I just think they're brilliant together, absolutely brilliant, and created 2 stars. You go back to 1999, arguably the hottest year in WWE history, and there was a moment there around about SummerSlam when it was Triple H, Austin, and Mankind in the triple threat main event SummerSlam for the title. If they'd have put the belt on China in that summer, it would have worked. It would have worked. It might not have been forever. They put it on Vince McMahon for Christ's sake that year. It would have worked, and it would have told a story, and it wouldn't have felt out of place at all. They did that for each other. They brought themselves to the dance together. So yeah, it's a real big one for me.
I feel like I'm arguing against myself, but if you compare Triple H and China to Goldust and Marlena, of course, who had a big thing in the early months of 1997. Yeah. What did Triple H end up becoming, and what did China end up becoming, compared with what did Goldust and Marlena end up becoming? And it's just night and day, isn't it, in terms of how far they got? We're talking so far. We've mentioned, acts like Edge that got to the top or was at the top, Macho Man that was at the top or got there, and now we're mentioning Triple H. They've absolutely got to the highest you can get, not just being the champ, but being the focal point of the company at whatever point. And you simply can't say that for Goldust and Marlena or Bam Bam and Luna or, some of the other ones we said, even for Heenan and Perfect. Like, you cannot argue that they got to the very top. And I think that has to be a huge part. I've done a lot of setting up so far. Let's have you fire one at me. Let's have you set up one, whether it's one that you think is a talking point in sort of the mid-table of this, or whether it's a definite at the top. Let's have one from the Benson notepad.
Okay. You sort of mentioned on it earlier, and I'm not sure this one's going to get massive praise or get kicked by the side, but one I want to mention is Shawn Michaels and Diesel.
Okay, I don't even have that down, but yeah, okay, fair point.
You don't have that down? Oh, mate.
No, I absolutely should do.
Similar, it's similar to the Triple H one in that Shawn Michaels was doing great before Diesel came along. Shawn Michaels was on an upward trajectory and he was doing just fine. But oh my God, did that Diesel character add to him? You've got that snivelly little heel now who has that big bastard behind him to wipe up all his, clear up all his messes. And that is a sort of, that was Shawn Michaels in the early 90s. His character was essentially a rock star, wasn't he? And you can so imagine a guy like Axl Rose or Tommy Lee or someone like in that vein, obnoxious, filthy rock star in the early 90s, having that big bodyguard. He's hitting on a woman in a bar. The boyfriend comes along, and suddenly poof, the bodyguard's out of nowhere to clear up the mess. That's what Diesel was to Shawn Michaels. He was his problem solver, and it ratcheted up the heel persona so much in what Michaels did, and it allowed him to go even further out there as a heel, which is what ultimately got him into that main event slot, in my opinion. And then obviously the byproduct of that is you create a star in Diesel almost overnight. It's incredible to think that there was no real time between, he debuted in June 93, Diesel did. And then when did he become Intercontinental Champion? It was
soon.
It was within a year. It was 94, wasn't it?
Dead quick.
Yeah. It was somewhere between it was before King of the Ring, 1994. So it was somewhere like May-ish, about a year after his debut. And it felt like it worked perfectly. And then by the end of 94, well, by November 94, he was world champion. And he was, we've spoken about this before, that Diesel's world championship reign gets unfairly battened down. He was a very good world champion, a very popular world champion when he got that belt. It worked well. So that is another partnership that to me created not just two stars, but two all-time stars, two Hall of Famers. And I think, unlike Triple H, who I don't think maybe would have got there on his own, Shawn Michaels unquestionably would have got there on his own. But Diesel, I think, accelerated that process by 1, 2, 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that I've not included that on my list is more my definition of the topic, which is not to say, by the way, that I'm right about it and that we can't massage it slightly, but I think because I was thinking wrestler and non-wrestler, in my head, Diesel is almost like a tag team partner rather than a manager.
But he never was.
Right. But you're right. No, he comes in as a bodyguard, and if you can have Diesel, then if you can't have Diesel, then I can't have China. Do you know what I mean? It's a similar sort of process. So I think they both have to be allowed.
When Diesel went on his Intercontinental run, I know they tag teamed after that when they won the titles, but for a while, Shawn Michaels was his manager.
Well, yeah,
and he was his Bobby Heenan type mouthpiece. So he kind of flipped over. It's similar to what you're talking about with Spud and Alpha Female. That was the blueprint for what you're talking about, just same sex instead of male and female. And I think it was great. I just think it was absolutely fantastic. So I'd have it in consideration for sure.
Okay, let's mark that one down as well. A couple of others from that sort of. There was an era of managers, wasn't there? There was an era sort of from the late 80s. Forget that there was an era of managers before that, but there's certainly an era around the late 80s, early 90s where everyone had a manager. Every heel had a manager anyway. Let's have a couple from in there just to chat about, if not to put into the actual thing themselves. Is there anyone that you can have that stands out for Jimmy Hart? Hart Foundation, Mountie, Nasty Boys, Hogan.
Probably the Nasty Boys, if anything, or the Mountie. I equate Jimmy Hart to a manager of comedy mid-card heels. I know he wasn't always, but I like Jimmy Hart. I think he was a very good act, but he was always, to me, mid-cardish, and I think he just added a bit
cartoony.
Very cartoony. And I would there's none I would put forward for this list.
It's the complete. I've mentioned a couple of times on this show that I've been watching quite a lot of Nitro over the last 6 months or so, that following the start of Nitro, and I've just got into. I'm a few months into the NWO era, and I completely had forgotten that Jimmy Hart is such a big part of.
Oh, massive!
The Dungeon of Doom around this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't feel right. It's a darker sort of tone, and you've got Jimmy jumping around with his high voice, his megaphone, and his mouse, and it's like, to me, it doesn't work. What about Paul Ellering and LOD? The Road Warriors.
Well, all right. Prefacing it by saying I'm not familiar with their pre-WWF work. Not particularly. I know of it, but I've never really seen much of it. But no, he didn't have anything in the WWF. He had nothing to the act. Funnily enough,
I think it made it worse. I
showed my son the SummerSlam '92 entrance today. Funnily enough, with Rocco. Nothing with Rocco. And yeah, no, I don't think there's any argument to put him anywhere near this list with the LOD. That's all.
I think
Complicated and need a very, very simple presentation.
Yeah, I think I haven't seen enough of him in other promotions where they were clearly an act that worked together. So apologies if, in the AWA or wherever that was a wonderful act. But I think if you go, again, WrestleMania 8's a terrible WrestleMania anyway, in a lot of ways. And the fact that LOD aren't really on that show as a match, they just have a speaking session, and it's Paul Ellering's re-debut, as it were.
Yeah,
it's a terrible segment all around. It goes on for too long. Even Mean Gene is crap in that segment. He just goes, "Here they come." It's like, we're here. Who comes, Mean Gene? And the whole thing doesn't work at all. And back comes Ellering, and he goes, "I have returned. I am the bad apple." And everyone's going,
"Look who's driving the train."
I anyway, as an 8-year-old, was going, "Who are you?" They didn't really explain who. They didn't explain who he was. They just assumed that you knew, and it was.
I must say though, I did enjoy that promo. Like as I enjoyed pretty much every promo that Hawk made. The line that always stands out to me was when he goes, "Please do something blah 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 like a runaway train. Scary, huh? Scarier now. Look who's driving the train."
That's quite a good impression. Hawk was a great promo.
Loved Hawk. Hawk, that's another conversation for another time. But Hawk could have been such a massive single star. He had everything.
He should have been. Apart from the ability to sell, but that's another point. I'm sure if he learned that, he would have been. Well, mind you, Warrior didn't sell, so Warrior made it.
I was going to say, yeah.
Right. Who else we got that I want to run through? Oh, okay. This is quite a big one because it was a iconic duo. World champion, etc.
Yep.
Yokozuna and Mr. Fuji.
Ooh, what a good one. I didn't have that on my list, if I'm honest. But yeah, I've not got a lot to say about them because Fuji just kind of was window dressing for Yokozuna in a way. I would almost say Jim Cornette was more important to Yokozuna
than
Mr. Fuji.
It develops into that, and it's another one of those strange sort of groups where you had. There was a couple around about the same time. Funny enough, I don't know what the lack of confidence they had in Samoans, but when Arthur was the manager of the Head Shrinkers, we had to add in Luis Albano, and a similar thing to having Fuji with Yokozuna that we added in Cornette. I wouldn't have any of them on the list, personally speaking. I think it's egregious not to mention a world champion and an iconic duo of their era.
On the not trusting the Samoans with one manager list, you also had Bob Backlund and the Iron Sheik managing the Sultan.
Oh yeah,
when that was Rikishi. So yeah, there is a theme there, definitely. No, I wouldn't have them on this. I thought Fuji and Yoko were great together, but Yoko would have been great without Fuji. I think Jim Cornette added more to the presence. Definitely.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Fuji is definitely one of those that there's several of that era where you think, I don't think objectively they were all that good. I think they're just iconic because you remember them. Like I mentioned Slick earlier on. I don't think Jimmy Hart, Mr. Fuji, I'm not convinced any of them were particularly great acts.
We disliked Mr. Fuji as children of the late 80s and early 90s because he was a funny-looking foreign man with a bowler hat who looked just like the villains in the films that we watched.
Odd Job, wasn't he? He was meant to be Odd Job.
Yeah, he was Odd Job or Big Trouble in Little China or whatever. He was a massive racial stereotype. And we were conditioned to hate him because he was Japanese, not because of anything he actually did.
Yeah.
And
just to hold off the those that will pick up on things. He wasn't Japanese, was he? I believe he was Hawaiian. I think.
I believe so. Yeah.
But Paul doesn't mean he was Japanese. Paul means he was portraying.
The character was Japanese. Yeah.
Carry on.
Well, Yokozuna was the same. Yoko was from Samoa, wasn't he? So,
I think he was from California. But yeah, point taken. Yeah.
So I've kind of lost my thread there. But yeah, anyway, point is, yes, you're right. There are a lot of iconic managers. I'd put Slick in that bracket too, who were good parts of acts, but certainly not iconic.
Another quick one, a fun one, but probably not for the top of the list. Jeff Jarrett and the Roadie.
Good fun. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. Good fun. Worked well. Again, we're added to Jarrett's character immensely, and he needed that foil. He really did, because he kind of it's hard to say he seemed silly when he was just doing it himself, but he seemed more silly when he had no one to bounce off. When he had the roadie to bounce off, it felt like a more fulsome act. But no, not Trouble in this list.
No, I'm just looking through my list to the side of me here, and I'm basically clearing the decks to get down to the last 3 or 4 that I want to present as a as a very credible threat for the top. I would argue, going back, that again, it's too early for me to be fair on it. I think sometimes we should preface this podcast by saying the greatest in our era, or the greatest that we have seen, because we're certainly not saying necessarily that things that we didn't see were not great in themselves, because because Arnold Skoland and Bob Backlund, is that a candidate for the Grand Wizard and superstar Billy Graham, like
Albano and the Bulldogs?
We don't really necessarily have the chops to be able to discuss those ones. So I would say that the last one that I'm thinking is very, very good, but probably not right at the very top. This is probably around the playoffs rather than in the promotion places. What about Ted DiBiase and Virgil?
I suppose you've got to consider it, haven't you? I
mean, it's as over as it gets. Everything was over.
And it worked because it was the two of them. I suppose this is like Jeff Jarrett and the roadie, isn't it? But the difference is, I think Ted DiBiase came in with Virgil, didn't he? If I remember rightly.
I mean, if not, no, I don't think so. But I mean,
it was very close after, wasn't it?
But the $1 million man probably.
That's what I mean.
Virgil, yeah.
Similar to the Jarrett roadie conversation, in that the $1 million man character just wouldn't have got to work the way it did without that foil. But the difference is, A, they had much more success over a longer period of time, and B, they got to have that inevitable breakup, which Roddy and Jarrett never did. So yeah, similar thought process, but obviously much more successful. But no, looking at the list we've already got and the ones we've yet to talk about, it's not under consideration.
Assuming that you know roughly what I'm going to, what I've got left on my list, and leaving them to one side, I'm going to ask you next if you've got any others do you want to sort of mop up before we get to some serious ones. But to everyone listening and watching, just in case you feel that we've made some horrendous mistake, that we've left something off, if you are so upset that we have left off Shaniqua and the Basham brothers, then you can send in your queries at inbox@behaveyourselves.com. But for anything else that you think we may have missed off, you need to make sure that you're around for the questions that we ask on social media in terms of getting involved in this particular kind of thing. Paul, I think you roughly will know what were the ones that we've missed off so far. So anything else that you want to kind of mop up?
Well, I've got 4 more on my list, 3 of which will be on your list, so I'm not going to mention them. The only one that might not be, Vader, Big Van Vader, and Harley Race.
No, I haven't got. I haven't got that on the list. If only because I'm not sure what Harley. Harley could talk. Harley certainly gave credibility as a tough guy. But I just think Vader would have been all right on his own. I just don't think Vader necessarily needed. Harley was a great talker for himself. I'm not sure Harley was a great talker as a manager. He was good, but not great.
What I liked about Harley as his manager, and from what you heard, I think it's the Bruce Pritchard show, but I could be wrong. Jim Ross, maybe. What I liked about the character and the combination was that Harley Race acted like his genuine manager. Acted like a guy. Like, you imagine the character of Vader. The character of Vader wouldn't be able to be trusted on his own. He wouldn't be able to, he wouldn't be able to be strategic. And, he was a huge weapon that would just blow up wherever it chose. Whereas what Harley Race did is he guided that weapon, and he knew he had the most powerful force in the company, but it needed directing at the right people at the right time. And Harley Race did that, and apparently fulfilled the same role off screen as well, and really kept Vader on the straight and narrow throughout the whole thing. But that's what I loved about it. I loved about the fact that you've got this indestructible, unbeatable force that if you left it without guidance, it would just blow up and wouldn't get anywhere. If you took it to his logical conclusion, Vader would just be sort of happy, just beat people up, and it wouldn't matter whether that's Hulk Hogan with a world title on the line or Louis Spicolli in the opening match. Or, in fact, he'd probably prefer to take on 3 jobbers at once than one main eventer. But Harley Race harnessed it, found it, discovered it, manipulated it, and made it a megastar. and I'm talking in kayfabe terms here now.
Yeah.
And I love that, and I love the fact that because he was such a legendary tough guy himself, you really bought that if Harley Race endorsed this tough guy, then fuck me, he must be pretty hard, because Harley Race wouldn't just put all his eggs in anybody's basket.
I think it's the sort of iconography of the pair that work, in the sense that I don't think it's anything that Harley necessarily did as a manager or that Vader did with his manager, but more just the fact, it's the endorsement. I think actually what's worth noting is that it's something that AEW are trying to do themselves, isn't it? By not
Indeed,
they've not necessarily got Tully Blanchard and funny enough, it's Arn and Tully, but Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard managing people and Jake Roberts. They're not necessarily the manager in the old school way. They are cutting promos and they're being at ringside or whatever, but they're not necessarily that mouthpiece for whatever. It's still about the wrestler, but it's almost as if to say, okay, if Jake Roberts thinks something of this guy, he must be something. Or if Cody is listening to Arn Anderson, then he's getting some good advice. It's just that little bit of credibility. Because quite frankly, do you know what I think? I'm always trying to make a sporting angle out of it. Like where can you compare that to real sport? And actually, probably the best thing is actually tennis.
Okay.
Like you might think, so Andy Murray's a great tennis player. Who's his coach? Boris Becker. I think it was at one point anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like the idea that
as well.
Yeah, or Becker has done it, or John McEnroe, or Ivan Lendl, or whoever might be the coach from that era back. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Murray's
coach at one point, the Triple H and China of tennis, was Andy Murray and Amelie Mauresmo. But there are former tennis players that coach current tennis players. Same with the golf. There are former golfers that that coach current golfers, and that's more of the development that you would have in the way that AEW are doing it. And I absolutely applaud that, because if you try and build your show around Jake Roberts or Arn Anderson, then you've got a bit of a problem, haven't you? You should be trying to build it around MJF or something. So I like the way they've done it. I like the way they've taken it on to
I do.
Old school level. I think it's very, very smart. I think it adds credibility to. I assume they're doing what the WCW and before that Jim Crockett Promotions did, which is skew their demographic that little bit older and realize it's older fans that have been around for a long time and get it and understand the business. And those people will recognize Jake, and that's where they go. And I absolutely think that's what they did with Harley in that era, because I just don't remember. I don't remember great Harley Race promos as a manager. I've seen loads and loads of it as the champion, and Harley had such presence in the way he spoke, so gruff, and it was like you believed Harley Race. And I think you're right. It's the credibility that Harley offered rather than the charisma or the presence or anything like that. A very fair mention, but it's not one that I would consider to be top level.
No, nor would I. Top 10, maybe. Top 5,
maybe.
no.
Pushing top 10.
Yeah.
Certainly on the. I think most of the ones we've mentioned have been on the positive side of the dial. We've not.
Yeah, definitely.
We've not really done, for example, Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire, which you would probably argue didn't really work, and a few others along the way that have been a bit of a clunker. We didn't really go too much about DiBiase and Virgil, but we're knocking that on the head, are we? We didn't really put that one into the mixture.
Yeah, really good, but not all time.
Okay, I have 3 remaining.
I know the 3.
Okay. Are we clear then to talk about these 3 and throw them right into the tinderbox? Is that okay?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. You start. Pick one.
Okay. Because we normally leave him till last, let's pick him up here. The Undertaker and Paul Bearer. It's
like the Royal Rumble, isn't it? If you have the Undertaker in the Royal Rumble, he almost always comes out 27, 28, 29 or 30. You have to leave him till that late stage. Paul Bearer and Undertaker. I mean,
what's there to say?
we ought to give them some lip service because it would be rude not to. But anyone that thinks these are not getting on the list of 5 is bonkers.
Yeah.
Talk about the presentation. Let's talk about the things that went around Bearer and Undertaker. We're just celebrating 30 years of the Undertaker. For how many of those 30 years has Paul Bearer been his manager?
Not that many.
7 or 8?
I would say that would be pushing it.
Because it's so that you start off late 1990 with Brother Love.
It's 91 to 9. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
Quite early 1991, you get Bearer.
Yeah.
And then 1996 SummerSlam is when they break, isn't it? So you've
Five
got
and a half years.
five and a half years. Then you've got whenever he came back during the corporate ministry thing, and then when the return of the dead man. It's probably not more than 7 years or so combined, is it?
I think you're right, actually. I think I'd forgotten about the corporate ministry sort of era, because then he had the 2004 run for just a few months, didn't he? So they really had 3 distinct runs. They had the initial 5.5, they had the Healy corporate ministry type style, and then they had that very, very short run in 2004. So you're probably right. It's between 7 and 8 years out of 30. It's less than certainly. It's a quarter. It's a quarter, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly between a quarter and a third.
Yeah. So. But how iconic are they together? Like, just massive. And like he's another example of, did he do much? For the first 3 years? Not a lot. Like, in terms of getting involved in storylines and whatnot, not a huge amount. But that's kind of my point. He didn't.
That's not
need
the whole
to.
thing, though, is it? That's not.
No, it's not. Exactly.
Not all of these managers that we've mentioned have got involved in storylines. It's really about what they are for the presentation. And
everything.
The Undertaker, without it being spoken from the very start, is a zombie, right? The Undertaker has died. He has come back to life as a zombie because Brother Love and Paul Bearer and $1 Million Man or whoever have brought him back to life. That is kind of the unspoken story here. He's able to pop off back to the dark side whenever he wants to. He sits up because of this urn. Like, it is meant to be a supernatural zombie character, and supernatural zombies don't do 20-minute promos in a Texan accent. So he can do his, few one-liners and stuff here and there, but he needed, someone to speak for him. And actually, we love Bruce, and we worked with Bruce, and we like his podcast, and he's back in the saddle and all that kind of thing. And Brother Love is its own fun thing. But Brother Love, like you said about Jimmy Hart, Brother Love is a mid-card comedy gimmick.
Yep.
It is not a main event heel gimmick. And if it would have stayed as Brother Love, and again, not a knock on Bruce is doing the character he was asked to do. But if Brother Love stays with Undertaker for more than 6 months, it's Mordecai.
No, absolutely.
It ain't working. And everything we said about, Triple H might have got there without China. Shawn Michaels might have got there without Diesel. Austin would have got there without saying Austin 316. This was all accelerant. Without Paul Bearer, I don't think Undertaker makes it past a year, let alone 30.
Oh, mate, I am fully with you. Like he, like you say, he gave. Let me sort of track back and say, when I say he didn't get involved in the stories, he was so much more important than that, because he gave license to that character. He could, like say, he basically cut all his promos. He directed it. He was the boss. If you go by your logic of him being an undead zombies don't think for themselves. Frankenstein's monster doesn't think for themselves. It's Paul Bearer that sort of calls the shots. Look who's driving the train. It's Paul Bearer. And then obviously later on, very good. Later on, when he became a babyface, as you said earlier, with who did you make this comparison with? I'm forgetting Savage. Now. Sorry, was it Savage? I was thinking Savage, but but Paul Bearer allowed him that vulnerability. No, it was Goldust and Marlena. It was Goldust and Marlena, I'm thinking. And Paul Bearer allowed him that point of weakness, like this indestructible monster. You needed a way to get to him, and that was through Paul Bearer. Either physically assaulting him or taking that urn or whatever. And without that, the face turn wouldn't have worked, because again, it had been impervious to pain. So, and then obviously all the transitions that Undertaker went through in his career were a result of Paul Bearer. He's there. They are there. They are huge. They're iconic. They come as a pair, and they're on the 5.
I think so. No, I don't think so. I absolutely know so. There's another interesting little nuance of Paul Bearer. I forget exactly what show it is. I think it's WrestleMania 7. I'm familiar with going back and watching, and Bearer's in the corner of Taker, and the familiar Paul Bearer that we all know. He's not doing that. He's there going, yes. Oh, yes. It's a really deep voiced Paul Bearer. He didn't find that. Oh, really? Yes. He doesn't find it early on. It's much different. It's really, honestly, I think it's WrestleMania 7. It's the one I'm familiar with him doing it. It might be earlier, but.
Well, I tell you what I used to love. I tell you what I used to love, and I thought was what you might have said there. The way when he'd be at ringside, he'd often talk into the camera.
Yeah.
That was great fun. great fun. But
There's a few of them that did that, but he did it probably best of all. Or Talk to the Urn as well.
So good.
There's so many parts of that. And I should clarify something I said before, which is when I said The Undertaker wouldn't have lasted 30 years, that is not to say that Mark Calloway might not have.
Correct.
He might have found something else. The same way that Fake Diesel didn't work, Isaac Yankem didn't work, Christmas Creature, Unabomber, blah, 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 blah. But Glenn Jacobs got there in the end with Kane.
Absolutely.
They would have found something for Mark Calloway. He would have still have been as good as he is, or well, probably not as good, but he would have still been a very vital, valuable part of the company for a long time. But he just wouldn't, I don't think Undertaker would, because on paper, Undertaker is a stupid gimmick.
Yep.
It doesn't work. And in wrestling, you can make something work by being so damn good at it. And that's essentially what happened. But that's a little bit of everything that had to go right. All the stars had to be aligned. It had to be the right time in the world. It's even a bit of a fortuitous thing that they discovered that they bring in William Moody, the former Percy Pringle, as a manager, and then find out he used to be a mortician.
That's right.
Maybe we'll give him to Taker then. But they didn't even know that, and it's just absolutely
crazy,
everything, isn't it? Sitting perfectly in one little Pandora's box, and it all seemed to work. So amazing, undoubtedly on the list. Can I go next? And
you absolutely can.
I assume that you've got this one on the list as well. Let's talk about Jim Cornette for the first time, really. We skirted around him on Yokozuna. He was obviously manager of Vader, of Owen Hart, of the British Bulldog, and others in WWF. But all time, when you go through everything that ever existed, the pairing of Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express throughout various territories, but particularly, I think, to people's wider knowledge in the NWA of the late 80s. There were lots of incarnations of the Midnights. There's lots of different people that were the tag team. It kind of settled on being Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, and then you could argue it became even better with Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. There's been lots of different incarnations. It's odd that you would get that, but almost every tag team ever has been that's the two, and then if you swap one in, it doesn't really work. Like, I'm not putting them on the same levels as the Midnights, but we talked about the Head Shrinkers earlier on.
Yeah.
Not the same when you replace Samu with Sione the Barbarian, was it? Do you know what I mean? Even if Barbarian was probably a better wrestler, it just doesn't feel right when you change one tag team member. Loads of changes for the Midnights, but it probably carried on working because Jim Cornette was the Midnight Express.
Correct. See, the Midnight Express were two immensely talented wrestlers, and it was, like you said, it was different wrestlers at any one time, but they were an extension of Jim Cornette's personality. If Jim Cornette had willed two human beings into existence to do his bidding, he would have willed into existence the Midnight Express. Everything about them was an absolutely solid team. They were on what they were, which is probably unlike any other combination we've seen, with a few maybe exceptions. You felt like they had one mind between the three of them. Everything they did was calculated, was evil. Well, not evil, that's the wrong word. They cheated. They weren't evil, were they? They were cheating bad guys rather than evil bad guys for the majority of it. But the point is, they were scheming, horrible little shits. And there were manifestations of what Jim Cornette was, and equally he was a mirror image. In the ring, you've got these two well-muscled, good-looking, suave dudes, and on the outside, you've got a small, awkward-looking, bespectacled shell of a man, physically and appearance-wise, who was living out his dreams and his hopes through these two guys in the ring. He wanted to be that guy. That was the character of Jim Cornette. The character of Jim Cornette is someone who wanted to be beautiful Bobby Eaton or sweet Stan Lane, but he couldn't be, so he was the next best thing. And he kept that great, he kept that gravy train rolling the whole time through whatever tactic he needed to do. I just think they were the best, in terms of manager, heel manager, and heel charge, fighting like enemies over the course of years and years and years, and building heat. They were the best at that ever. That's me.
I mean, if you go back to the origins of Cornette, he's a mama's boy, isn't he? The whole point is that he's got all his money from Mrs. Cornette, Mama Cornette, and is spending it and all this kind of stuff. And there's very much that thing you talked about with Paul Bearer being the the arm of the Undertaker, which is the most vulnerable. Jim Cornette flips that to a heel thing, which is that you wanted to see him pay. He's vulnerable in the Midnights, but in a nasty way, and you want people to get to him. If someone gets to Paul Bearer, you feel bad for Undertaker from having his mate having been harmed. If someone gets to Cornette, you go finally. Yeah. And it's the same thing with Heenan and with most weaselish heel managers, but some more than others. And I think Cornette is the absolute epitome of that. And he is, talk about someone that could, start a fight in an empty room or whatever. He just seems constantly able to be the kind of person that can just talk by saying anything. He could read the phone book and annoy you, couldn't he?
And yeah, absolutely.
There's something about Jim Cornette, and it's again, this might be before some people's time. If it is, please go and look them up, because there's some fabulous stuff. And it's not just the stuff between the Midnights and the Rock and Roll Express, which is the most famous feud, but so many other things that went on. And if you are about mine and Paul's age, in your mid to late 30s, and you remember what we remember, the nearest thing to the Midnight Express in WWE, and I'm not counting the new Midnight Express, we're not starting down Bart Gunn, Bob Holly route, but the nearest thing to the Midnight Express in WWE or WWF essentially was the Heavenly Bodies. The Heavenly Bodies is the same act, really. Yeah. Even down to the nicknames being sort of, Dr. Tom Pritchard or Doctor of Desire, wasn't it? The Doctor of Desire.
That's right.
Tom
Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey.
And the Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey. So that follows, Sweet Stan Lane, Loverboy Dennis Condrey. It's the same sort of nicknaming style. Even down to the thing of Cornette would introduce the team and then the team would introduce Cornette. The same. It's really the same sort of act. And it still worked. It was a good act, the Heavenly Bodies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Albeit not a main event one. I think this is going to be hard to shift. In terms of, again, it's what we talked about from the very start of this podcast. It's the act. It's not the individual with a good manager. It's not a good manager with someone that he wrestled with. It's the entire act. And you cannot imagine Jim Cornette of ever being the big star without the Midnight Express, and you cannot imagine the Midnight Express of being there without, Cornette doing their speaking. So.
Correct.
I would be astonished if this doesn't get in the 5 once we knuckle down to it. Although we might have said that 6 or 7 times already.
Well, we've got, as far as I can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 8 on our list, and the last one.
We're about to make it 9, aren't we?
Well, no. This includes what I'm talking about, because I think this is definitely on the short list. It's going to be on mine. It's going to be on yours. It's not a manager. It's not a valet.
No,
it's not a second. It's an advocate.
It's a rapper. It's a rapper. Oscar in Men on a Mission. What?
It's an advocate. It's the advocate.
That sort of egg yolk and orange drink, isn't it? That you have in a snowball.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah. Should we just pun out from here and say the last one we're going to talk about, Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar? Wonderful or what?
I mean, just Lesnar is the absolute ultimate person that needs the manager, in the sense of wrestling needs a mouthpiece. And if you're going to be a Lesnar, if Lesnar worked every week, he wouldn't necessarily need a manager. He'd also diminish his star power, but that's not the point. Sometimes you can be a good enough in-ring performer that everything speaks. I'm struggling to think of anyone off some. Ken Shamrock, right? If you take Ken Shamrock from that sort of world, the UFC world, the WWF that Ken Shamrock came into, Shamrock was better off without a manager. Yep. He just kicked ass. He was just brooding and intense. Goldberg was better off without a manager. You don't need managers, these people. They get in, kick ass, leave. That's fine. I came very near to arrive, raise hell, they believe. But, that's what they do. And Austin didn't really need a manager. There's certain tough guy, and mainly baby faces, but they don't need the manager. Lesnar wouldn't if he was doing that all the time, but because you only see him wrestle once in a blue moon and you need to talk up the event, he can't do that. He's actually a better talker than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
But, and I particularly love it when they do those sort of cut together backstage things of Lesnar looking at obviously an interviewer and saying, "Really? He said that about me? I'm going to come in." That's not done that justice, but those little cut together things are great. But you need someone to stand in the ring and do it. And could you imagine Lesnar on his own in the ring the night after he'd beaten Undertaker? Saying, "I am the 1 in 21-1." Could you imagine him saying, "I am the reigning defending"? No, it's all Paul Heyman. It's all this concocted, amazing crucible that Paul Heyman has put together to produce this Brock Lesnar guy. And you just get the feeling that he's done it from day one. Brock Lesnar has hardly ever done anything in the wrestling business without Paul Heyman, either in his corner, opposite him in the corner, or writing it.
Yep.
He is in, and even writing his book and managing him when he was in another company. Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar just go together. It's Morecambe and Wise more than it is bloody Paul Bearer and Undertaker. It's just they belong together.
If you were to fast forward 20 years and we were to do a podcast on Paul Heyman, what is Paul Heyman's legacy in wrestling? Is it ECW owner Paul Heyman, or is it Brock Lesnar's advocate?
It's a great question.
Because it should be ECW by all sense. It should be.
But ECW failed.
But it failed, and he's doing such an awesome job with Brock Lesnar, and has done for such a long time, that he's, in my opinion, he's overshadowed everything in ECW. When I think of Paul Heyman, I think of the act with Brock Lesnar first and foremost.
Yeah, I do.
And that is really saying something, considering how interwoven he is with such a beloved wrestling brand. But to me, it's just, they just go. They work so well together, and he's a hype man, isn't he? And what makes Lesnar the biggest box office star in wrestling? And again, I mean that both in kayfabe and non-kayfabe terms, is because Paul Heyman says he is. And if you just have Brock Lesnar telling us how great he is, then he's just another heel blowing his own trumpet. But Paul Heyman is doing it for him, and that makes such a massive, massive difference. The character of Brock Lesnar wouldn't do that. He wants to go in. He's the best in the world at kicking people's head in. He wants to do that. He doesn't want to deal with the business. He doesn't want to deal with the negotiations. He doesn't want to deal with hyping it up. He literally stands there and leaves it to Paul Heyman. And then when the bell goes, bosh, he does his job. And his job is to get in there and get paid and get out as quickly as he possibly can. It's Paul Heyman who adds the sizzle. And there's not many acts that are so defined in their roles like that. Jim Ross famous says it, doesn't he? He compares the steak and the sizzle. And Lesnar and Heyman are those two elements writ large and writ completely separate. Without the other, they just don't work. Well, you've seen when Paul Heyman went with other acts. Okay, he worked really well with CM Punk, but it's not very difficult to work superbly well with CM Punk. But they tried to rub him off on Cesaro and Curtis Axel and Ryback, and it failed miserably. They need each other, and with each other, they are just sublime. And apart, they're not anywhere near the same.
No, they're not. They're just not. And I think in terms of if you did the whole act of Heyman and Lesnar, focusing on Lesnar, with Heyman making it what it is. We talked earlier on about the nature of flipping between babyface and heel, whether or not Savage did it right, and Rollins doesn't necessarily get it right. Not that I'm knocking Seth Rollins. Other people that you've seen in the past are polarizing. A John Cena, a Roman Reigns. Some like them, some don't. Brock Lesnar is a very different one in the sense that Brock Lesnar just plows his own furrow, and he is a babyface or a heel depending on who he's wrestling against. Because if you watched Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns tomorrow, the crowd would cheer for Brock Lesnar. But if you watch Brock Lesnar versus Daniel Bryan tomorrow, they would all cheer for Daniel Bryan. In terms of a pack of cards, Brock Lesnar is a 7.
Yeah.
If he's wrestling against a king, he's a low card, and if he's wrestling against a 2, he's a high one. It's just and that's not a criticism. It is very much I think it's a realistic. That's what people are like. It's what sports people are like. Yeah. There are sports people that you like or you don't like, but depending on who they're against, it changes your mind about how you view them. And Brock Lesnar is right down the middle, and it's Paul Heyman that makes that. Because when Paul Heyman wants to, he can be an arrogant, in-your-face, you're nobody, Brock Lesnar's going to rip your head off promo. Or sometimes Paul Heyman looks at the Brock Lesnar opponent and goes, you are the greatest thing that's come along in professional wrestling in the last 10 years. But Brock Lesnar's still better. Like, he builds up the opponent and then says Brock Lesnar's better. It's that cold classic of, if you say that your opponent's a pile of garbage, you either lose to a pile of garbage or all you did was beat a pile of garbage. And I would always say, I don't want to get too off track, but I would always say that's my biggest negative point against The Rock. I've never thought The Rock made anyone. The Rock did his own thing despite everyone else. The Rock is a little bit like the Road Warriors in the sense that, okay, the Road Warriors didn't sell in the ring. Well, The Rock didn't sell on the mic. The Rock never gave anyone anything. Everyone had to earn what they earned against The Rock, and that's a minor criticism because he's the biggest star in the entertainment world. And he got himself there, but he never gave anything to anyone else. Did Rock? Heyman absolutely does. Heyman doesn't just make Lesnar. Heyman makes the opponents if he wants to, and that's also critical.
And on that, in that vein, just before we wrap up on Heyman and Lesnar, they're going into 5. If Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman came out on Raw next week and decided they were going to be baby faces, Paul Heyman could make them the biggest baby face in the company.
Oh God, yeah.
Within a minute.
Yeah.
And that's his skill, and that's the skill of the pairing. And like you said, Brock Lesnar, from the day he came into the company, that character hasn't changed. Just his targets have. He has been consistent for, all right, he's out for a long time, but 18 years essentially.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's 18 years ago that he
I know. He's still the next big thing, isn't he? But yeah, I think that's so. Look, he's in. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think
they are in.
They are in. I think we've got 4 definites, mate, and I think we've got 3, as far as I'm concerned, fighting over one spot.
Okay, Randy and Liz are in.
Correct.
Bearer and Undertaker are in.
Correct.
Heyman and Lesnar are in.
Correct.
Cornette and the Midnights are in.
Hang on.
Okay. I will give you my 5th choice about how we've spoken about them. Okay, in fact, just give me a list of who you think are the ones that we could put in.
So the 3 I've got Triple H and China, Edge and Lita, Shawn Michaels and Diesel.
Okay. Before we started talking, my next level down after those 4 include Triple H and China, Goldust and Marlena, and DiBiase and Virgil. But over the topics, I am content that you've talked me out of those 2. There are better options. I am still going with Triple H and China. I still think that's the one that I think ultimately, if you just look at the wrestler out of these combos, and I'm not talking that in terms of how good they are as a worker, I'm not talking about what titles they've won, but just the position they've held in the company. It leaves you with Undertaker, Macho Man, Lesnar, Triple H. Okay, the Midnight Express is different. That's the exception to the rule, as you said earlier. But you're talking but in their era, they were huge. They headlined cards all around the country, so they were main eventers. They might not fit in the zeitgeist, but they were main eventers. I just look at the other ones and say, of course, Shawn Michaels made it up there and whatever. But I still think the trajectory he was on, Diesel just accelerated it a wee bit. I think there's an argument to say Triple H might not have made it at all. China helped make it. And I also don't think Edge is on that same level as all those others that we've mentioned. I don't think Edge is on the level of Taker, Lesnar, Macho Man, and Triple H. He's not far off it, but I don't think they deliberately made that Edge Lita thing. I think they just saw what was happening and went with it. It's also quite short-lived as well. It stays in the memory, but it's relatively short-lived. I could be talked out of this, but I would go Triple H and China. I would like to hear you might be able to talk me into one of the other 2.
No, I'm not going to try, actually. I'd love to include Lita and Edge, just because I like to include one of the, I like to look like I'm all clever and pulled one out of thin air that really works. But in actual reality, I think you're right. If you're using it, if you're using the criteria of saying, what did it do for both guys? What stars did it make? Like you say, if you compare the 2, who was the biggest star ultimately as a result of the partnership, Triple H or Edge? It was Triple H. Who was the biggest star, the female side of it, out of the partnership? Was it China or Lita? It's China.
Well, I mean,
by a country mile. So I don't think there's any argument there, unfortunately. I might have preferred Lita and Edge, arguably. But I think Triple H and China are the one. And then with Diesel and Shawn Michaels.
I think Shawn and Diesel is more of a case than Edge.
I do too.
If we were knocking them out down to the last 2, I'd have Shawn and Diesel versus Triple H and China.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I just think it goes on longevity.
Yeah,
really.
Agreed.
And I think Triple H and China did more for longer than HBK and Diesel did. So yeah, I think that's the 5th on the list.
Indeed. What was the name of the In Your House pay-per-view when they wrestled?
When who wrestled? Sorry.
Good friends, better enemies.
There you go.
Do you think more about Shawn and Diesel because of their matches as much as their time together? And I also still think of Diesel as being more of a wrestler that was in a bodyguard role. I know China wrestled, but I think a bodyguard became a wrestler, whereas Kevin Nash was very much a wrestler. They were just waiting for the right time to introduce him. They are to me more of a tag team. Triple H and China weren't a tag team. You know, Shawn and Diesel won the tag titles. You know, you weren't ever going to see Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar winning the tag titles. You weren't ever going to see Paul Bearer and Undertaker winning the tag titles. Cornette, I'm sure, wrestled with the Midnights in special 6-man matches, but as a non-wrestler, Diesel was a wrestler. And, you know, people can make fun of Kevin Nash, and you did on our social media this week. But, you know, it's ultimately, I think he's a wrestler, and he won the world title on his own. I'm not sure how you can be a top flight manager, valet, etc., and you won the world title before your wrestler did. You know, Diesel was champ before Shawn. So in some way, you know, China wasn't going to be champ before Triple H, was she? So, you know, I would go with that as being my argument for. But there's, you know, we have legitimately gone through a lot of names here today. So I think it's fascinating. We need to round things off. So what is our 5 then? So you give us a 5. This is your job.
5, and I'll remind you ahead of this 5, you can now go and vote for this. So if you want to vote for any of these 5, you've got to head to hookedonwrestling.co.uk/vote. hookedonwrestling.co.uk/vote, and your choices this week and who is the best wrestler non-wrestler combination will be Triple H and China, Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, Paul Bearer and The Undertaker, Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar, and Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. There you 5. And a damn good 5.
5 premium acts. I think ultimately we were always going to have a 4, and it was the 5th one that was the choice. But I had loads of fun going through, you know, whether it was talking about Yokozuna and Mr. Fuji, or talking about Paul Ellering and LOD, or Jimmy Hart, or Slick, or Gary Hart, or whoever we talked about. Just a fun little route through the history of professional wrestling. It does show how many good managers, valets, seconds, agents, advocates, morticians there have been. And try explaining that to a non-wrestling person. Yeah, one of the blokes is on there who's a mortician looking after a zombie guy. And they're the biggest actor of all time. Anyway, go and vote. hookedonwrestling.co.uk/vote, as Paul says. Check out the whole of hookedonwrestling.uk. Oh, what a good plug. That's why you do the plugs. Check out hookedonwrestling.co.uk while you're there. Some great fun stuff, both already there and still to come. Also, the Hooked on Wrestling Podcast Network has various other podcasts on there, 4 or 5 other than ours. Check them out while you've got some time. And in addition, as I mentioned at the very start, it's quiz night on Sunday. So join us at 8 p.m. on YouTube Live and Facebook Live for our weekly quiz. I think it's probably the highlight of our week now. It might be the flagship thing of the Hooked on Wrestling enterprise, I think, anyway. So join us for all them. And if nothing else, be back here again this time next week for a brand new topic on how to be great. You'll find out the winner of the poll at the start of next week's podcast, and we'll set a brand new topic for you then. We'll let you know what that is in the coming days. Anything to add, Paul, before we wrap up?
Not really. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I'd like to, you know, this is a conversation I'd like to keep going on social media in the next few days. So guys, just get us on Twitter, HO_wrestling, or Rob McNichol, or Paul B HOW. Get chatting. Let's talk about this, because it's a load of fun, and it'd be a shame just to kill it there. So
that's a good point, actually, because I think having listened to this podcast now, some people might be more clear on what we were after in terms of the poll. So yeah, let everyone know what the 5 we've come up with are, if you want, or if you want to keep that safe for the podcast, and then get people talking and voting and having a chat, because that's really what. At the end of the day, folks, this is not a real award. It's just it's a starting point for a discussion and to relive some great moments of wrestling's past. So yeah, we'd still really like to hear from you, especially if you're really, really, really mad that we left off Christy Hemme and the Rock and Rave Infection, or various other people that have been part of our sport's great history. Anything to add, Paul, before we go?
No, thank you, mate, as always, for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you all for listening and watching wherever you've been doing so from. Don't forget to subscribe, etc., and share the word. We'll be back here next week with another topic on how to be great. And in the meantime, remember, it's wrestling. Enjoy it. We'll see you very soon.